Hi, my name is Alec and work with Alec's Chess Club in Studio City, California. And today we're going to learn how to checkmate with a king and a rook. Alright, so here's how this works. So we're going to start off with kind of a basic position. The king and the rook are going to be in the middle. And so the main thing that you want to look for is you're trying to make a box. And you keep making the box smaller and smaller and smaller until the king has nowhere to go. So here's how you do that. So in this situation, the king and the rook are right next to each other, which is perfect because the king and the rook basically have to be attached at the hip in order for this to be able to work. So for example, I moved to here, to E5, and now what I've done is I've made a box on this side, and I've made a box on the E file as well. So the king is trapped. I've already cut off 3/4 of the board from the king. Now you can see obviously if the king is back here, this doesn't work because now the king just takes the rook. So I have to have the king up like very close to the rook for this to work. So now the king has a couple of options, and both of them are bad because anything that he does is going to get him closer to getting checkmated. So let's say he goes to C4. Okay? Now what you always want to think, every time you move with this, you want to think, how can I shrink the box? Can I shrink the box? Can I shrink the box? And only if you can't shrink the box, then you'll have to do something else. But for right now, yes, you can shrink the box because the rook can move over like this. So you did have this line, this was your box, and now you're moving over one, and now this is your box. So it's become a little bit smaller than it was. Okay, so now let's say this time the king, black, realizes what you're doing. He knows that if you go here, you're just going to shrink it again. So he says, well, let me try this way. So I'll go down to C3. Okay, this time you have to be really careful because you can't shrink the box by going to D4 because now the king just takes the rook. So I have to bring my king in. So I bring the king in like this. And now even that cuts off some squares from the king. Like before when the king was on D6, the black king could go to B4 or he could go to C4, but now that the king's coming down to C5, now you cut off both of those squares. Okay, so now whichever way black goes is going to be able to shrink the box for sure this time. So let's say I go to B2. Now, how do I shrink the box? Rook to D4. So now you've made the box way smaller than it was before. Alright, so let's say the king goes back to C3. Okay, now can I shrink the box by going to C4? No, because if I go to C4, now the king gets out of my box. He can go there. He can go this way or he can go this way, and you don't ever want to give your opponent a choice on where they go. You want to force them to go where you want them to go. So, keep them inside your box. This time you're going to have to do what's called a waiting move. You're basically passing to the other person, so he has to make the move. So in this case, the waiting move would be king to D5. So now either the king's going to go to B3, or he's going to go to C2, or I guess he could go to B2 too. Let's say he goes to B3. Then the rook, where does the rook go to shrink the box? Rook to C4. So now your box is really getting small. So you're getting very, very close to being able to checkmate. So let's say the king goes down this time, goes to B2. Now you got to get your king to catch up with your rook here. So let's say he goes to D4. Now the king goes back up, because one thing if you're black, you want to stay away from the wall. So if the other person doesn't force you to go to a wall, do not go to the wall. Stay away from the wall as much as you can. So in other words, black could have gone like this, or this, or this, but he knows not to go against the wall, so he goes back. He wants to stay as close to the middle of the board as he can. So then the king continues to come down, and now black's going to be forced to pick one of these. So he goes to B2 because he doesn't want to go to a wall. And now, how do you shrink the box this time? Rook to C3, like that. Okay? Then, you're going to go, the king's going to go, let's say he goes to A2. Now, if you try to shrink the box with the rook, it doesn't work because the king just kills the rook, so you can't do that. So now you got to go in with the king like this. Okay, so now the king's going to come down to A1. Now you can actually checkmate. This is the first time that you're going to check in this whole series of moves. And it happens to be the first time and the last time because it's going to be checkmate too. Alright, so you go rook to a3, and that's checkmate. What do you do, and this happens frequently, what do you do if the king, in this position, the king was on a2? Because if you go to a3 like that, now the king can just kill you. So you have to figure out a way to get the king to go down to a1, but still be controlling this square. Because if you take away the rook right now, the king can go up to a3. And you don't want to let him go to a3 because he's getting out of your box. So how do you get him to go down to a1? The easiest way to do it is to take your rook and do a waiting move with the rook. So you can do that any number of moves. You can go to b3. Is that right? Yeah, you can do that. You can go to b3, or you can go to d3, or e3, or any of these along here. Doesn't really matter which one. As long, let's say I go to back to all the way to h3. So even though I'm way back here, even though I'm all the way on h3, I'm still controlling a3. That's the most important one to be controlling. So now the king has no choice. He can't go to b2 because of the king. He can't go to b1 because of the king. He can't go to a3 because of the rook. So now he has to go to a1, and now you get to go to checkmate like that. And that's it. That's how to checkmate with a rook. Just to let you know that it's Alec's Chess Club, and we meet every Saturday and every Sunday from 12 to 3. So if you'd like to come for the class, or you'd like to come for the tournament, we'd love to have you. It is for kids, for scholastic, so it's anywhere from about 4 years old up through 17. So I look forward to meeting you.